I just can have a quick response from you guys, if you know, which one is the last week of study? Is it the week that is starting on August 12th? That is the last week. Like again, which one is our exam week? I'm just curious to know because I don't see that. I don't have that calendar, final calendar here. So do you guys know that which one is our last week of study or the exam week, by the way? Because this is our 12th week, and the next will be 13th. That will start on 29th of July, by the way. And then the week after that will start, let me see that. So this week started on 22, so the next week starting on 29. Next, after that, the week will start on 5. So is it the week that is starting on 5 is the exam week, or is that from the 12 to 16? Does anyone of you know about that one? If anyone has any information, can come up. Week 15. So week 15 means that this is our 12. So 13, 14, 15. So Hitesh, you mean, what I understand is you mean that the week starting on Monday, 12th August is the last week, right? Is that what you mean? Okay, okay, right. So wonderful. So that's good. Let's see that if that week is starting on. So what we'll do is that again, it's for recording purpose as well for all the sections as well. I might have exam on the same day for all sections, and that might be the Tuesday. So if I ask you guys, like again, I might have that on this same Tuesday exam for all sections, like this 8, 7, 8, and 9. So what I'll do is that I'll just make them aware. So it means that our exam is going to be, the final exam is going to be on August, it's 13th, I think. It should be August 13th, the Tuesday of that week. Let me just see that again, calendar. Yeah, it is going to be August 13th. So yeah, so we are going to have our final exam on that August 13, 2024. So keep that in mind, and we will have our exam on week 13. Okay, one more thing. I'll just talk about the quiz that was supposed to happen today. I'll talk about the quiz towards the end for all sections, for your section as well, for all the other sections as well. I'll just talk about that later on after we have had this discussion. So today we are starting talking about security in databases, and that's another very, very important aspect of all the databases. And security is by all means the very integral part of our modern day applications. The one of the very recent incident that you might have seen, the compromising of Microsoft Windows, like Microsoft products, on Friday last. You remember that everything went just lifeless. There were lots of airports, they were just closed because of that one. There were no flights taking off. In US there were literally a lot of airports that were literally closed. And the banking transactions, I don't know if you guys had a experience of that one. At least I had that experience of banking transactions as well. Everything went into a little dark, not little dark, it was a good bit dark. And that's maybe that may be one of the reason having some security problems. Of course, it might be software bug that caused that at that time, but the software bugs, or if you talk about those things, they have to be they have to be actually the softwares have to be non-error prone. It can be a software that is error prone, or maybe the database that just compromises itself, or maybe a cybersecurity attack or something like that. So whatever is the case, do you see that how big the effect of any mishandling, or again the compromising of a system might be, that the whole world gets stuck? And that was really quite a concern. And billions of dollars were, we know that they were wasted, and they were the loss of billions of dollars to people. And really that really caused a lot of people a lot of harm. And that is the thing that really happened. So anyhow, So we are talking about the security of the database. So actually, the security is, as I said, one of the important concern of any application, and um, the amount of security or the amount of problem that we might face when we are installing. We have SQL Server installed into our own machines. We should not be that much of a concern. Why? Because it's not a production environment. It's a sort of development environment. It's only a single machine right now handling very few users, or maybe literally practically no users at most of the times. But when you talk about the production environment, a production server environment, production environment, and you install SQL Server over there, so you have to configure security to prevent misuse of your data. That's a very, very important aspect of a web developer, of a database developer. That database developer knows how to secure that. And in modern world, if you say, in modern world, you would find that people with having security specializations, maybe you say in cybersecurity or something, they are more considered over the people who do not have, of course, that ample knowledge of the security in any like in any ways. So remember that. So again, right now, since we are having a database installed in our local machine, we are not that much of a concern of a security. But yes, that becomes a security concern when we go to the production environment, when we go to the server where we have implemented our application. And people might want to look, there are lots of people who are just trying to find the vulnerabilities in the softwares, trying to find the vulnerabilities in the databases, trying to find the vulnerabilities everywhere, so that they can exploit them. And once they exploit them, they would be able to make use of that one. Right. So let's talk about the databases, and we'll see a diagram also to start with. So actually, as a user, before you can work on database, you need to have a user login, valid login ID. Unless you have a valid login ID, of course, you would never be able to just connect to a database. So you need a login ID so that you can log on to SQL Server. Then you must have access to database itself. Sometimes you have login ID, but of course that login is not providing me the access to the database. The permissions are not allowing me. The security is not allowing me. But anyhow, so right now, to start our topics, we'll talk about, first of all, we'll just talk about how to work with login IDs and how to give a user access to database, right? So, but let's talk about a little bit preview of this, this picture we are looking at. If you look at this picture, it actually illustrates, as a big picture, it illustrates how a user gains access to a SQL Server database. First, look at this part. The user must connect and log on to the server using either an application program or the management studio, right? As you can see here, that the login ID can be authenticated one or two ways. The login ID can be authenticated one or two ways, and we have never really observed that. When we were opening up our the SQL Server Management Studio, we were always looking at these two things, but we never realized them. But you see that it can be authenticated in two ways, and I'll talk about these two in a bit. But let's see what happens when over here. Once the user is logged in, either by using Windows authentication or by using the SQL Server authentication, anyways, what happens is that it has the access. Like he can perform, he can perform depend on the permission. What he can do is basically depending upon the permissions that are given to him. The permissions that we have been granted to this one. So we can grant object permissions, so the user can perform specific actions of the object. Make sense? Or we can grant schema permissions, the schema of the database, the table. If we can schema permissions, to user can access the schema or can work with the schema or can manipulate the schema. And then we have specific SQL DDL permissions or statements. The permissions of the role they might give a user specific what specific user operations data that like user can do on the databases. So that is database server permissions that are used at performing specific action. In addition, you can define a collection of permissions as a role. One is the individual permissions, one is the collection, a lot of collection, and you call that roles. And you can use these roles and define that collective. It's something called a collective permission. And that collective permission is basically it's called a role. So role does what? This role, this yellow color role, then this role, if you have some certain role, you can assign users that role to grant them all the permissions associated, and makes it easier to manage security. So you instead of providing permissions to particular objects, why don't you define a role? Admin role, the user role, the data entry operator role, the the sorry, Arun, you want to say something?
No, sorry, sir.
Okay, no problem. Right, so that is specifically the roles that we talk about. So we can define a typical role, and then role does what? It gives access to particular things. It might be objects, it might be a lot of other things. So this collective permission is a very interesting one. It reduces, like this role thing, this reduces what? The number of permissions we must grant to each one. So again, we don't have to allocate single permissions or one after the other permission. Rather, we can collectively give it a role, and then the role person, whatever role we have given, is able to access some particular things because of these roles. So that is why in most of the systems you will see that people will be using role more often than the other things. So that is one thing that. So this also summarizes, as I told you that I'll talk about that one. This also summarizes the two ways through which user can can execute or can log in. Security. Two ways you can manage the SQL security. So now if you see at that, first you can do by executing SQL statements. We can execute some SQL statements over here, and system is stored. Can the graphical user interface, the management studio, or we can use the management studio's graphical interface to just do that one, right? The one technique that we use mostly is a matter of preference. Whatever you want to use, the management studio's UI that we used at some point of time, or you want to use some of the command like environment where just you prefer to write the commands, and that you will just use that. So what happens is that SQL management's the studio, it makes it easier for us to just work on that one. And because we have got directly, we don't need to write a query. And some developers, they would always prefer to save themselves from writing a query, because they will say that we are good with this, the what you see is what you get type of thing, WIWIC. So we are just able to that one. But if you look at the dynamic SQL, for example, you are writing the SQL by your own hands. That would be really give you a code writing script, and you see that we wrote some script in our last class. For this reason, many experienced system administrators prefer to manage security using transact SQL. So they would, the gurus will always want to have a writing the code rather than using the WYSIWYG editor, because WYSIWYG editors there. Okay, so before we just practically jump into this one, we'll be just you see that these are the two ways, as I was talking about, transact SQL or management studio. So we can just use that one. So before we just typically talk about these terms and these other things, let's talk about a few terms that we will be using one after the other. One, we will be talking about one of the term as principal, right, which refers to a user group login or role that has access to database. A principal, we will call it. And that second thing that we might want to just talk about a lot is securable. That is the second one, is securable. And the securable basically does what? Securable will give us access to the the things that would be over there. So that is also typically another thing that we really talk about. So we will be just okay, a second. My system is hanging, or is it good with you? Like Hitesh, can you see that? Because I had my screen turned off and something has happened with this one.
Yeah, we can see, sir.
Okay, right. So yeah, so as I told you that we'll be talking about principal, we'll be talking about securable. The second was securable. It refers to a SQL server entity that can be secured. That includes tables. You can include SQL, like or you can include in that schemas. You can secure databases. So they are called securable, and we'll just talk about a lot of things as we progress during that one. Let's move forward about this picture and let's see what typically we are just doing. So if you look at that, typically a network user must log on to network at a PC using login ID. Again, that's the explanation of that picture. Once you're using Outlook SQL Server, the security configuration determines which database objects user can access and which not, and which SQL exponent user can execute. So again, all these are basically defined. So permissions define the actions a user can take on a database, such as table, view, or stored procedure on the object in the schema or the database or on a server. A role is a collection of permissions, as I told you, permissions that you can assign to a user by assigning the user role or some other concepts that we have. We'll just talk about this one. Let's move on. You can log on to SQL Server using one of the two types of login authentication. Again, we are talking about those two authentication methods that we have just seen. And that the two authentication methods are what? Windows authentication or SQL Server authentication, right? So Windows authentication or SQL Server authentication. So what happens is that to accommodate these two types of authentication, a server can be configured to run in one of the two authentication modes. So we can run that server maybe in window authentication mode, or we can run it in the mixed mode. Both of them is basically, you can say that both of them can be used. So if I look at one of the picture over here, if I just make it a bit bigger. So these are the two roles that we talk about. It may be the window authentication role, or it may be the SQL Server and window authentication mode, which is basically called as the hybrid mode. Like hybrid means, it's basically a collection of both. So if you have this mixed authentication mode, you can log in. Users can log in either by using Windows authentication or SQL Server authentication. When SQL Server authentication is basically used, the user must use SQL Server authentication to get access to that one. And again, that is something when you are installing SQL Server, you will get prompted for that SQL Server authentication thing, and you can just implement that over there. And interestingly, the SQL Server authentication, in the SQL Server authentication, the ID and password, we use are the SQL Server one. While installing, if you remember, when you are installing SQL Server, it might have asked you to define some data, some ID and password for your SQL Server authentication thing. So that authentication is SQL Server authentication, but we generally prefer window authentication, where like the password or the user IDs that we are using on our Windows, they should be usable. Like they are we can just use them, and we can just work with them. Right off. So now if you see it again, these are the two one. Windows authentication mode, only Windows authentication allowed. This is default. Mixed mode, both Windows authentication and SQL Server authentications are allowed. To use this mode, select the SQL Server and Windows authentication mode option. If your database needs to be accessed by a non-window client, you must use me. So again, remember, this is a point of alert. An alert that if you have people who will be accessing your machine, your system, your database from non-window authenticate, like in non-Windows machines, you have to have the mix mode of the SQL Server, because SQL Server itself, even though it's a Microsoft product, but it might be that like people will be using some other machines, some other architectures. So it's your responsibility to give them also an environment where they can just come and they can just work with the database. Why? Because you have to give them. Okay. So to change SQL Server authentication, right click on the server object, Explorer of the Management Studio, select properties, like and as selected command, and then display the server properties dialog box. Then display security post. When you use Windows authentication, access to SQL Server is controlled via security integrated Windows. This simplifies login because Windows users only have to log on to once, because Windows in you, once you give it that one, it actually does what it really allows us to, just create that one. So how to create login IDs? That's another interesting. The syntax of creating login statements. So let me just run SSMS as well. I would like you guys to also to just start your SSMS, because we'll try to run these commands and let's see that what is happening. My SQL server is starting. Okay, so look at that. It's authentication. Look at that. Windows authentication, and it can be Azure, it can be SQL Server authentication. And from here, we can select either of them. And right now, we are working with the Windows authentication. So you see Naman, PC Naman, and I'm just getting into this one because I don't have any password for my Windows. In the meantime, it is running. Let's come back here. And let's look at that one. Just close others. Right, so it's here. So what we have, create login. So syntax of create login statement. So create for the window authentication, we create login name from Windows with default database, whatever is the database, we can define a database or default language, and we can define language. With SQL Server authentication, it's a little bit different. Create login name with password equal to password. Again, so here it's not asking for the password. Why? Because it's a Windows authentication, and it will automatically just create that typical Windows thing that would be created. Right, so these are the generic syntax of creating the login IDs. So we are working with that one, and if we want to just run that, we can just create login. And there are lots of other options that we'll just talk about. If you look at that, database language, database expiration, it's the check policy, all of these are there. And let me just see that if it is started. Oh, it is not connecting, so it means my SQL server has stopped somehow. Let me go to the services, find out why my database is not running, SQL Server is not running. Okay, so it's here, SQL Server Express. It says automatic. I'll start that again. Right, if it is not running for you again, you can also come. Okay, and if I connect now, you see how quickly it connects. Let's see that. Right, so if I just run a new query, so for example, as we have seen here, an example given. So if create login accounting Susan Roberts from Windows, let's create that one. Why not? Let's create that one. Let's come here and I say create login. And see that, is it accounting / Susan Roberts account. So we have created that one from Windows. Right. So if I just create that one and I run that query. Okay. So it says that Windows NT user group are not found. Check the name again. It does not find that. It's not creating, rather it's trying to find that one. Okay. Okay, just give me a second. Let me see that here. So we have accounting slash, it should create that one. Okay, forget about the passwords. I would this was introduced in SQL. So it was basically introduced in 2005, like in SQL Server 2005. A default database, when you create a login, the default is set to master. So again, I'm right now, since I'm not setting it up, so it should go to the master. But look like if I'm missing something from this statement, let me just see that. It's the dropping login. Okay, now it looks like I'm just doing something wrong here. Let's do that. Login name from Windows. There's no language. If I'm not giving a database or language, of course, I want to. Okay. Okay, so we have this accounts here. Let's use this. These are the logins that we have. Okay, so we have got this one. So now let's create that one. It does not find that. So if I say, for example, NT service slash Susan Roberts, for example, let's run that. Okay. Why is it not creating that one? Is it giving the same error for you guys as well? Even though that I have just said that. Okay. Built-in slash users. It's the when it's creating that one. This is for the deletion for Windows authentication or altering. Altering is also done. Yeah, but it is not creating a login ID. Let me just check that one why it is not creating. Is it give the same error Hitesh to you use your side as well? When we are trying to create a user ID like this, create login. Okay, let me just see that. Let me create it from here, for example. Hmm. Okay, this group is not found. It's not finding that group, and that's very true. Just give me server rules. Okay, right. Right. We don't have a group this one, so let's do that. Public. Hmm. Hmm. It's not creating that one. Right? Let me just see that why it's doing that because it's something it should create. Like again. Hmm. Just give me a second and I'll check that one. Why it is not giving. Hmm. So these are the server roles and which the groups that we have. Server roles, credentials. Okay. Interesting. It's not creating, even though I've just worked with that one. I just cleared that role. Let's see this one. Let me find out from here. Maybe no, it's not giving there. It is taking ages. Let me just see that. Hmm. Okay, just a second. Let me see that. PC slash. Yeah, so you see that the server principal Maman PC is still or is already there, but why it is not creating any other uh ID? That's a problem because it says that it is already exists. Of course, it already exists. For example, you see that it says that the user or group are not found. Hitesh, so you're able to find something like I don't know what's wrong, what I'm doing wrong because it says that anti-user or group this PC slash ABC is not found. Check the name again. Hmm. Is there any specific naming issues or? Yes, Ritesh, you are right. I know that you have to just look into something. You can just give me a second. Just try to see that what's going on. I'm just trying to find out, like, if why it is not creating that role, because I've just done that and it just creates, and we have worked a lot of times on that. I don't know why it is just doing this right now. My machine is taking so long. Let me show you. Not even creating from that one. It should at least do that from the other side. If that not doing it from this side, but it's still not able to find that out. I was just trying to look into maybe if I'm missing something. Let's see that. This is for the user, and we'll see that later on for the schema. But why it is not creating a login? Let me just maybe open one more Chrome and see what is going on. Okay, let me just find out, and let's take a break. Right now, we'll take a break, and I'll try to just see that if I can able to find that out. Otherwise, we'll just we'll see that how to go about this login first of all, and then we'll just move to that one. So let's take a break of 15 minutes from here around, and I'll be back at 2:10, and let's see back the issue that by then, right? So I'll stop the recording as well here.